Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a leadership crucible, not a book club. The fleet needs warriors, not librarians shuffling paperwork. Try to keep up the jeering words of Midshipman First Class Bryce, Thorne echoed with practiced arrogance in the cavernous, sunlit atrium of the Academy's most hallowed hall, a place built to inspire humility, but which often incubated its opposite. The small group of senior midshipmen around him, all broad shoulders and chiseled jaws, offered a chorus of condescending snickers that bounced off the marble walls and polished brass. They laughed. They laughed at the small, unassuming woman in a simple, unadorned khaki uniform who had paused on the grand staircase to let a plebe with a dropped armload of books pass. She was a lieutenant commander, a rank that demanded deference, yet her presence was so quiet, so utterly devoid of military bearing or vanity, that to them, she was an administrative ghost, a clerical error in the great machine of war. She didn't react. Her face, framed by dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun, remained a mask of placid neutrality. There was no flash of anger in her eyes, no tightening of her jaw, no hint that the public humiliation had even registered. She simply waited, her posture economical, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. But as the cadets, led by the swaggering Thorne, began to descend again, one of them accidentally jostled her, a deliberate shove disguised as youthful carelessness. She stumbled, her balance lost for a single, graceless moment, and tumbled down 3 marble steps before catching herself on a balustrade. Her fall broken, but the indignity absolute. The laughter grew louder, crueler. Yet, from the balcony overlooking the atrium, the Academy superintendent, Admiral Caldwell, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, saw not the fall, but the recovery. He saw the way she used the momentum, the way her body absorbed the impact without panic, the way her hands found purchase not with a frantic slap, but with a precise, calculated placement. He saw the coiled stillness that settled over her the instant she was stable. It was a flicker of something ancient and lethal, a predator's grace hidden within a librarian's shell, and the Admiral felt a cold knot of recognition tighten in his gut. The cadets saw a clumsy bureaucrat. He saw a ghost from a world they couldn't possibly comprehend. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence in the comments below. The entire incident on the grand staircase, from Thorne's initial verbal jab to the final, contemptuous chuckle as his clique swept past the fallen officer, lasted no more than 30 seconds. Yet, in that half-minute, a deep and ugly line was drawn in the culture of the institution. It was a testament to the insidious nature of assumption, the poison of judging a warrior by the crispness of their uniform rather than the content of their soul. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma did not file a report. She did not seek out Thorne to reprimand him. She did not complain to her superiors or confide in a colleague. Her response was a continuation of her defining characteristic, a profound and unnerving silence. She simply rose to her feet, her movements fluid and unhurried. She gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod to the terrified plebe who had gathered his scattered books, a gesture of reassurance that seemed to absorb his panic and her own humiliation in one quiet motion. Then, she continued her ascent up the stairs as if nothing had happened, her footsteps making no sound on the cold marble. This lack of reaction was, to the observing midshipmen, confirmation of her weakness. They saw it as fear, an inability to confront a future leader like Thorne, the son of a celebrated vice admiral and the Academy star athlete. They whispered in the mess halls and the barracks that night, embellishing the story, painting Thorne as a righteous enforcer of standards and Sharma as a paper pusher who had forgotten her place. They didn't understand that her silence was not an absence of response, but a response in itself. It was the crushing silence of a mountain in the face of the wind, the absolute stillness of the deep ocean beneath a raging storm. It was the disciplined calm of a professional who understood a fundamental truth that these boys, in all their polished glory, had yet to learn. The most dangerous people in the world are the ones who have nothing to prove to anyone. While they were busy broadcasting their perceived strength through noise and aggression, she was conserving energy, observing patterns, and processing the world with a clarity they mistook for meekness. Her focus was not on the petty dramas of the hallway, but on the mission she had been assigned: to observe the Academy's training protocols and identify the very weaknesses that Thorn and his friends so proudly embodied. Her silence was a crucible of its own, testing the character of all who encountered it, and they had all failed spectacularly. The next week, the senior midshipmen faced one of the Academy's most notorious rites of passage, the combat water survival test, colloquially and fearfully known as drown-proofing. The exercise was a brutal psychological and physical ordeal designed to simulate the terrifying helplessness of being lost at sea. Cadets would have their hands bound behind their backs and their feet tied together at the ankles before being pushed into the deep end of the Olympic-sized pool. They were expected to survive for 20 minutes using a technique of controlled bobbing, then propel themselves 100 meters to the other side, and finally perform a series of underwater somersaults. It was a test designed to break the arrogant and expose the panicked. Bryce Thorne strode onto the pool deck with the confidence of a Roman god. He was a champion swimmer, and he viewed this exercise as just another stage on which to perform his innate superiority. He joked with the instructors, flexed for his friends, and cast a dismissive glance towards the far end of the pool where Lieutenant Commander Sharma stood, clipboard in hand, observing as part of her curriculum review. To him, she was just a piece of the scenery, an irrelevant administrator ticking boxes. The exercise began. One by one, the bound midshipmen were dropped into the cold, chlorinated water. The initial shock gave way to a frantic, churning struggle for most. But Thorne, true to form, was a picture of calm efficiency. He bobbed rhythmically, his powerful lungs and athletic grace making it look easy. But 10 minutes in, the unrelenting stress began to take its toll. A smaller midshipman near Thorne began to panic, his bobbing becoming erratic, his breathing turning to desperate gasps. He inhaled water, and his panic escalated into a full-blown, life-threatening crisis. The instructors barked orders, ready to intervene, but Thorne, seeing an opportunity for heroism, decided to act himself. He tried to maneuver towards the flailing cadet, but in his haste, he broke his own rhythm, his movements becoming inefficient. In trying to save another, he compromised his own precarious state, and a wave of pure, cold panic, an emotion he had never truly felt, seized him. He too began to sink. The pool, once a stage for his glory, had become a churning vortex of chaos, with two cadets now in mortal danger. The instructors moved, whistles blew, and a rescue hook was being prepared, but the situation was deteriorating with terrifying speed. The two panicking midshipmen were now tangled together in a flailing knot of limbs, dragging each other down in a primal, unthinking fight for air. Precise moment of escalating chaos that the entire dynamic of the room shifted. A singular, focused calm pierced through the noise and panic. Lieutenant Commander Sharma had placed her clipboard carefully on a bench. She had not shouted for attention, nor did she run. She moved with a chilling economy of motion, stripping off her khaki overshirt and shoes in 3 precise, practiced movements. Before anyone could process what was happening, she was at the edge of the pool. She didn't dive. She entered the water with a silent, controlled slide that barely created a ripple, a technique designed for stealth insertion, not for a community pool. The instructors paused, stunned into inaction by the sheer authority of her movement. Underwater, the scene was a nightmare of thrashing limbs and contorted faces. Sharma moved through it like a different species. She did not swim. She propelled herself with a powerful, dolphin-like kick, her body a study in hydrodynamic perfection. She reached the 2 sinking cadets, her expression as placid as it had been on the staircase. With a strength that seemed impossible for her small frame, she untangled them. She didn't grab or pull. She used pressure points and leverage, her hands finding nerve clusters on Thorne's neck and the other cadet's shoulder with surgical precision. The maneuver momentarily stunned them, interrupting their panic-fueled struggles just long enough for her to act. She secured them both, one under each arm, and with a powerful surge brought them both to the surface. The entire underwater rescue, from her entry to their surfacing, took less than 7 seconds. The room was now utterly silent, save for the gasping breaths of the 2 rescued cadets. But Sharma wasn't finished. After pushing them towards the waiting instructors, she turned away from the edge of the pool, took a single breath, and let herself sink back beneath the surface. With her own hands and feet still unbound, she began to perform the drown-proofing exercise herself, her form impossibly perfect, her movements as calm and rhythmic as a ticking clock. The demonstration was a silent, devastating indictment of everything they thought they knew. The atmosphere on the pool deck had transformed from one of high adrenaline training to that of a sacred temple. The only sound was the gentle splash as Sharma surfaced and submerged, executing the bobbing technique with the metronomic calm of a machine. Every eye was locked on her. The midshipmen, treading water or clinging to the sides of the pool, watched with a mixture of awe and dawning horror. The instructors, seasoned veterans of water survival, stood motionless, their faces etched with a disbelief so profound it bordered on reverence. They were witnessing something that didn't belong in a training manual, a level of mastery that felt alien. Bryce Thorne, now coughing up water on the pool deck, propped himself up on one elbow, his arrogance washed away by the cold shock of his own failure and the sheer, undeniable competence of the woman he had humiliated. He saw her now, truly saw her for the first time. He saw the absolute lack of wasted energy, the way her body conserved oxygen, the almost meditative state she seemed to be in. It wasn't swimming, it was an expression of a philosophy, a way of being. It was the physical manifestation of a discipline so deep it was terrifying. It was at that moment that Admiral Caldwell, who had been observing from the elevated gallery, made his way down to the pool deck. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate, each one seeming to mark the end of an era of ignorance. He didn't look at the sputtering Thorne or the stunned instructors. His gaze was fixed on the woman in the water. He walked to the edge of the pool, just as Sharma, having completed the 100-meter transit, performed her final, perfect somersault and surfaced. She looked up, her expression unchanged, and saw the Admiral. She simply trod water, awaiting his command. The Admiral didn't speak. He turned to his aide and held out his hand. The aide, understanding instantly, handed him a ruggedized military tablet. Admiral Caldwell tapped the screen a few times, his thumb moving with grim purpose. Then, he turned the screen towards the assembled midshipmen, towards Bryce Thorne, who was now shakily getting to his feet. On the screen, illuminated in the stark, humid air of the natatorium, was a personnel file. The name read, Sharma, ANYA, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. The cadets leaned in, their eyes struggling to comprehend the lines of text that followed. The information scrolled past in a staccato rhythm of elite, almost mythical designations, each one a hammer blow to their preconceived notions. Unit assignment, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The official, unclassified name for SEAL Team 6. A collective, involuntary gasp went through the room. This was not a real unit to them. It was a legend, a ghost story whispered in the dark, the absolute apex predators of the modern military world. Combat de promo 12. The number was absurd, unthinkable for an officer who looked no older than 35. It represented a lifetime spent in the darkest corners of the world. Then came the awards, a constellation of valor that stole the breath from their lungs. Silver Star, the nation's third highest award for gallantry in action. Bronze Star with V4 Valor, with an oak leaf cluster, indicating a second award. Purple Heart, with 2 oak leaf clusters, meaning she had been wounded in combat on 3 separate occasions. The list went on, a litany of quiet heroism and unimaginable sacrifice. Presidential Unit Citation, Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor. The screen was a testament to a life lived at the very edge of human endurance, a secret history written in blood and courage. Admiral Caldwell lowered the tablet. The silence in the room was now so absolute, so heavy, that it felt like a physical pressure. He looked directly at Bryce Thorne, his eyes like chips of granite. Then, he turned his body to face the woman still treading water calmly in the pool. In a move that sent a shockwave of protocol-shattering significance through every person present, Admiral Caldwell, a 3-star admiral and the superintendent of the entire United States Naval Academy, drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a slow, perfect formal salute. Lieutenant Commander Sharma, his voice boomed, sharp and clear, cutting through the silence. "Permission to come aboard the pool deck, ma'am." The use of ma'am was not just courtesy. It was a profound act of public deference, a correction of the cosmic injustice that had transpired on the grand staircase. He was not speaking to a subordinate. He was acknowledging a master of his craft, a warrior whose quiet professionalism dwarfed the performative masculinity of everyone else in the room. The story of what happened at the pool spread through the academy, not like wildfire, but like a pressure wave from a deep-sea detonation, a silent, unstoppable force that rearranged the very foundations of the institution's social hierarchy. It wasn't gossip, it was scripture. The narrative was passed in hushed, reverent tones in the mess hall, in the quiet of the library stacks, and in the late-night darkness of the barracks. Every detail was dissected and mythologized. The way she entered the water without a splash, the impossible efficiency of the rescue, the otherworldly calm of her solo demonstration, and, most powerfully, the Admiral's salute. That single gesture became the defining symbol of the event, a public anointing that separated the real from the fraudulent. The name Sharma, once anonymous, was now spoken with the kind of awe usually reserved for historical figures like Halsey or Nimitz. She became a living legend, a ghost in their midst. The effect on Bryce Thorne was catastrophic and, ultimately, transformative. His world had not just been shaken, it had been utterly demolished. The currency he had traded on his entire life, his name, his physique, his swagger, his aggression, had been revealed as counterfeit. He was publicly stripped of his command responsibilities within the brigade of midshipmen and faced a disciplinary board. But the official punishment was nothing compared to the internal one. He was haunted by the memory of her calm face as she pulled him from the water he was supposed to have mastered, the complete absence of judgment or triumph in her eyes. It was that professional indifference that broke him more than any rebuke could have. A week later, he sought her out. He found her not in a position of authority, but in the armory, meticulously cleaning a rifle with the focused patience of a watchmaker. He stood before her, stripped of all his former arrogance, and delivered a raw, stammering apology. He apologized for the stares, for his words, for his ignorance. Sharma didn't stop her work. She simply paused, looked up at him, and nodded once. "Your apology is noted, midshipman," she said, her voice even and low. "Your focus now should be on learning the difference between reputation and character. The former is what people think you are. The latter is who you are when no one is watching." Dismissed, it was the most she had ever said to him, and every word landed like a precisely placed shot. The incident also created its own physical landmarks. The grand staircase where she had fallen was unofficially, but permanently, renamed by the midshipmen. They called it the Sharma Steps, and it became a place of quiet reflection, a reminder that the most unassuming surfaces can hide the deepest strengths. The lesson of the Sharma Steps and the pool of calm became institutionalized. It was no longer just a story. It was a core part of the academy's unwritten curriculum. Senior officers began to use it as a teaching parable for incoming plebes, a stark and powerful illustration of the dangers of assumption and the true nature of a warrior. The narrative served as a potent inoculation against the kind of superficial arrogance that Bryce Thorne had once embodied. It taught them to look past the uniform, past the rank, past the gender or the size of a person, and to search instead for the quiet indicators of competence. The economy of motion, the steadiness of the hands, the calmness of the eyes under pressure. The legend of the quiet lieutenant commander forced a generation of future officers to recalibrate their definition of strength. They learned that silence is not weakness, that humility is not cowardice, and that the most effective leaders are often the ones who have no need to broadcast their own greatness. Bryce Thorne, to his credit, became the most fervent evangelist of this new gospel. The humbling he received that day broke him down to his foundations and allowed him to be rebuilt as something far better. He dedicated himself to his studies and his training with a newfound, quiet intensity. He stopped speaking of his famous father and started listening to the wisdom of the grizzled old master chiefs who ran the training ranges. He sought out Sharma not for praise, but for guidance, which she gave not in words, but in small, observable actions. He watched how she maintained her equipment, how she observed a tactical problem before offering a solution, how she treated the lowest-ranking sailor with the same quiet respect she showed the admiral. He learned that true leadership was not about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the most competent. He graduated not at the top of his class in terms of fanfare, but with the deep and abiding respect of the instructors and peers who had witnessed his transformation. His journey from arrogance to humility became, in itself, a secondary part of the legend, a testament to the fact that even the most profound errors in judgment could be corrected through a sincere desire to learn and grow. The quiet professional, through her actions alone, had not only proven her own worth, but had also redeemed the man who had wronged her, forging a stronger, wiser leader in the process. Years passed. The story of Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma endured, becoming a piece of institutional folklore, a foundational myth for the Academy. Like all myths, it grew slightly with each telling, but its core truth remained immutable. Sharma herself was long gone, having rotated out to another classified assignment, another dark corner of the world where her unique skills were needed. She left behind no statues, no plaques, no official record of her time, there beyond a dry administrative file. Her legacy was not written in brass or stone. It was etched into the character of the officers who had been shaped by her example. Her presence had been like a tempering fire, burning away the dross of arrogance and leaving behind the hardened steel of true professionalism. The Sharma steps remained, a silent monument to her brief, impactful passage. New generations of midshipmen would walk them, and the older ones would tell them the story, pointing to the spot where she fell and, more importantly, where she rose again, utterly unperturbed. The pool was still the site of the drown-proofing test, but the instructors now told her story before the exercise began, setting a standard of calm competence that every cadet strived to emulate. The lesson had become proactive, not reactive. Captain Bryce Thorne stood on the bridge of a guided missile destroyer in the South China Sea, navigating a tense standoff with a hostile fleet. The air was thick with tension, the crew on a knife's edge. He saw a young, hot-headed ensign recommending an aggressive, provocative maneuver, his voice loud, his posture full of the same brittle confidence Thorne himself once possessed. Thorne calmly placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, guiding him to a quiet corner of the bridge. "Ensign," he said, his voice low and steady, "let me tell you a story about a woman I once knew. A librarian. She taught me that the loudest person on the battlefield is usually the first to die. She taught me about the strategic value of silence." He then recounted the tale of the stairs and the pool, not as a boast, but as a confession and a lesson. The ensign listened, his arrogance slowly melting away, replaced by a look of dawning understanding. The legend was still working. It was still teaching. It was still shaping the fleet, one officer at a time, ensuring that the quiet strength of Anya Sharma would continue to ripple outwards, long after she herself had disappeared back into the shadows. The legacy of a true warrior is not found in the medals pinned to their chest or the stories told in crowded bars. It is not measured in the enemies they defeat, but in the allies they create and the character they build in those who follow. Anya Sharma's time at the Academy was a masterclass in this principle. She arrived as a ghost, an anonymous observer, and she left the same way. She sought no credit, desired no fame, and required no validation. Her work was the mission, and the mission was to observe, to identify, and to correct a fundamental flaw in the culture of the institution tasked with forging the Navy's future leaders. She did not correct it with a report, a lecture, or a disciplinary hearing. She corrected it with a demonstration. She held up a mirror, and in her reflection, the Academy was forced to see its own hubris. Her triumph was not over Bryce Thorne. It was over the very idea that strength must be loud, that competence must be advertised, and that worth is determined by appearance. She proved, in one silent, devastatingly effective sequence of events, that true power is quiet. It is the steady hand, the calm heart, the mind that sees the solution while others are still yelling about the problem. It is the professional who does the job not for applause, but because the job must be done. This is the ethos of the quiet professional, the silent warrior archetype that forms the bedrock of the world's most elite units. They are the men and women who move through the world unseen, their greatness hidden in plain sight, their resumes written in classified mission reports, and the grateful memories of those they have saved. Their silence is their shield, and their competence is their sword. They understand that respect is not something you can demand. It is something you earn, often without saying a single word. The ripples from her actions continue to spread, a quiet wave of change moving through the fleet. In every officer who chooses listening over shouting, in every leader who values humility over bravado, her legacy lives on. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.